Over the last year and a half, I've seen and learned a lot about current gaming culture and the controversies surrounding it. This is not going to be a detailed documentation of everything I've seen or know, so much as an outline as to how I think we got here. To do this video the way I'd like to do it would require a fair amount of time and resources, but I think what I already know is enough to suffice. The first place I'd like to go is to a panel from 2011, Ludic Salon, Shaping Play Spaces Within Media Cultures. There were 3 videos of this panel posted on Vimeo.
Today we want to talk about shaping play spaces within media cultures. And this is a salon, and there are basically 3 groups involved with this. The Ludic Interfaces group is hosting it, and I'm going to be the moderator of this event.
That was the introduction for the first video. I'm not going to focus much on the first 2, but there was one thing that grabbed my attention in the second video.
I guess I could add one more thing that especially I think relates to this idea of ludic practices. In that our approach is in some ways a bit scientific or similar to engineering practices, but we have different ways of evaluating it and different goals. So in a sense we're kind of, I guess, faking it or playing it being scientists or engineers, because we're concerned with reproducible results. We're not concerned with producing products or reliable systems. We're more interested in actually doing the reverse and looking at anomalies and weird things and kind of surprising things that would probably be rejected by, or at least seen as annoying to someone who's actually wanted to work in an academic or professional context.
That's a very good question, which we also are confronted with. But I see certain fields of science having a problem with that approach. But the whole question, is there such thing as a ludic science? Is it possible? Is it thinkable? Could one sort of find a place for this in academia? Is sort of the goal that we've set ourselves. So fascinating, fabulous.
One of the biggest concerns with the work of Feminist Frequency and various other ideologues who critique video games is the issues with their scientific approach. Now, while the project they were working on was not specifically video games, back in 2011, these ideologues knew their ideas would be rejected or at least annoying to academics. Now, as for the third video,
we had in mind what we wanted to talk about, and it's called Controlled Invasion, we had a list of questions that all of our interviewees answered, and developed a manifesto about our feelings about games and their ability to their power to control us, and for us, how do we control them? And just as a little bit of background, both Torsten and I really love games, so it's not to say that we're only negative about them, but we're very concerned and want to explore this.
The ability of games to control us, the power of video games. They are very concerned. After that section, they play a video, but I'll come back to that later. Right now, I want to focus more on the panel itself.
I was immediately struck when you started talking about bringing it into politics and making decisions. And I immediately thought of the Theatre of the Oppressed and Augustus, I can't pronounce his name properly, Augusto Boal, and the work that he did within theatre and using theatre to make political decisions and make people work together on that level.
The question is, who defines what is a positive result? And this brings me to...
Torsten and I do.
Oh, of course. Okay, well, then it's clear. Then that's clear. Now, but I mean, the whole question of games and morality, right?
I don't like, I just say what I don't like. I don't like the games industry. I don't like, no, because they're doing it for the market. I mean, it's good to use a medium to make money and stuff like that, and to make more money, and maybe to make people addictive. This is not okay. what is a casual game? I mean, it's just fun. And for me, it's not enough just to have fun, because I mean, in real life, I have fun enough. And I mean, a game should have more opportunities, and it should have like always compare it with a movie. Maybe it's wrong, maybe it's, but I think it's right.
Games have gotten so much of a bad rap for the bad things that have been attributed to them incorrectly, that it's hard to admit or to own up to the things the powers that they really do have, whether it's for good or not. And the danger is, like, if you admit any kind of responsibility, then suddenly you're taking on all kinds of incorrect and people are trying to blame you for stuff that isn't the responsibility of the medium. So I think that's the hard part. It's like, if we admit or allow for this even small bit of responsibility, then suddenly we're on very dangerous ground.
What would you do if you would get the grant to make a game with no strings attached? And my vision for that would be really that we can make games that actually problematize the relationship between game designers and gamers. So that as a game designer, you could make a game that doesn't aim for maximum fun, for maximum replayability, for maximum getting other people involved, but we could actually make games that are maybe kind of boring in some parts, or make games, that sort of where there's a difference between the player and the game, and there's space for players to think about what they're actually doing.
For me, that was mainly about we can't retreat into the fantasy that games have no impact, is really where it was going, but in a more entertaining way.
I mean, I'm far too old to do this, because no one's going to be interested in what I've got to say. But if you've got people who are young enough and subversive enough to make it really cool to attack this bloated media, then it's something that we could really use, I think.
One thing that repeatedly came up was ethics. By that I believe they mean ethics in game design. As far as how this is all connected, I'll show you in due time. Now that we've established what these ideologues want to do with video games and the industry, let's turn to gaming journalism. For this section, I'll have to go even further back, all the way to 2008. The two journalists I want to focus on are some of the more well-known and long-standing gaming journalists, Stephen Totilo and Lee Alexander. Stephen wrote an article back in April of 2008, "I was a girl in Grand Theft Auto 4, less sexy than expected." I have been waiting for a Grand Theft Auto that is as violent and sexual and satirical as all the previous games in the series and puts a lady in the center of it all. What could Rockstar Games say with a female Grand Theft Auto star? What new way could they make people? What could they say about gender? About America? This links to an article, "An Asian American plays games as a white person, whether she likes it or not." The discussion of having more representation in video games is nothing new. It predates Anita Sarkeesian's Kickstarter by several years. In Steven's article, he talks about his experience playing as a female avatar in Grand Theft Auto 4 multiplayer. The article ends like this. "I expected to feel a revolution the first time I played a woman in Grand Theft Auto on a console. I didn't. Not so during my initial 2-hour attempt. Still, a girl got to cause some mayhem. Gamers have been saying for many years that it's not that big of a deal whether you play a male or a female. However, to play the devil's advocate, I can understand the desire to see more female avatars, as sometimes people like something they can identify with. It might be more important to a girl. But identity politics is nothing new in gaming. Perhaps I just say it wasn't as bad back then. It's not like he was attacking the game for its portrayal of women." A week later, he published another article. The problem with that line, "It's just a game. Are our games our fantasies?" In the article, he talks more about representations in games and links to other articles talking about it, but I want to focus on this section. But then I wrote a piece about playing a woman in Grand Theft Auto and suggested that it would be really interesting if Rockstar Games made a whole Grand Theft Auto that starred a woman. It shouldn't matter, right? Not any more than it matters what color Chris Redfield and his zombie enemies are. Except, my post was shouted down. I was accused of spoiling things, of meddling. I was accused of feminism. I was told that a woman lead in Grand Theft Auto would ruin things. I saw a double standard these past 2 weeks, a double standard between people who said race is a non-factor in games and people who said gender is. Between people who downplayed context and people who could only see context. And I'm calling that out. If anyone out there wants to write a doctoral thesis about the difference between race and gender in video games, this is your cue. Steven was criticized for his views and used his article to address the criticism. Steven did elaborate more, but even back in 2008, gaming journalists weren't shy about defending their ideology. Another thing I learned was there was a little controversy about the portrayals of African Americans in the trailer for Resident Evil 5. Controversies over representation in video games were nothing new with Anita Sarkeesian. I don't get the impression it was as big a deal back then as it is today, but that's just speculation. Now, on to Lee Alexander. In June 2008, she wrote an article, Anti-Feministing, debunking the argument against Grand Theft Auto 4. In this article, Lee takes a feminist critic of Grand Theft Auto to task. This is a section from the article. Before we address an argument to her statement, it's necessary to first pick out a few serious flaws in her opinion of the game. Thanks, IGN. First, she referenced to IGN's video as a trailer for the game, which it was not, of course, being that it was neither produced, publicized, or sanctioned by the title's developer, Rockstar, and was not intended to be used as an advertisement nor representation of the game. The development of that video was entirely the doing of IGN, who when questioned by MTV multiplayer Steven Totillo admitted it messed up and removed the video, whose caption had read, "Grab a cup of hot coffee and enjoy the working girls of the city." I guess back then she was more against unfair criticism and representation of games. IGN was held accountable for what it did and admitted it messed up. She had a follow-up article, Industry Apologetics, It's Not Just a Game. To summarize this article, she didn't say games should never be critiqued, but did emphasize how important it was to defend video games against unfair criticism. One of the ways I rationalize what I'd written is by noting that games are scapegoated and crucified at every turn by people who'd never even played them, and that this unfair public flogging threatens the medium's potential for mainstream legitimacy. Why those who make games don't defend their own craft vigorously is a question for another time, but my position has been that the least we can do is to return these volleys when they're aimed our way. If we want to see games truly thrive and grow away from stigma, it's our responsibility, really. And that's why the most irresponsible thing we can do as a gamer is to speak the phrase, "It's only a game." In this article, she referenced Steven Totillo again, but questions like MTV multiplayer Steven Totillo's asking, "Are games our fantasies?" ought not to be brushed under the rug. "Are games our fantasies?" was one I just covered a few minutes ago. I'm not sure if Lee Alexander and Steven Totillo were friends back then, but back in 2008, you could see hints of what was to come in the way gaming journalists think and how close they may be. So now let's jump to 2012 with Anita Sarkeesian. There was a lot of speculation about this project when it first came out, but there were also people interested in what she had to say. I don't know what I could add that hasn't already been said, but with the onset of her Kickstarter, we also saw the emergence of the harassment narrative. This was the moment I believe started the divide in gaming culture. Two sides emerged as a result, those for Anita Sarkeesian and those against her. Some people were so aggravated at this project, they rallied against her. Some people were so upset by the harassment, they rallied behind Anita. Now sure, there are conspiracies, especially around gaming journalism, so I'm not going to completely dismiss that angle. However, I'd also argue that in a way, both sides already existed before the Kickstarter. Gaming journalists had an interest in this style of critique, and trolls had a history of disliking it. The field was already set. Anita just kicked things off. Soon afterwards came a slug of interviews, loads of coverage, as well as her famous TEDx talk. I've read a great deal revolving around the Kickstarter and harassment, and I see both sides of the argument. So like I said, I don't know what else I could add. Sometime later, Anita released her first video in March of 2013, Damsel in Distress Part 1. As with the Kickstarter, there were those that rallied for and against her. With the emergence of her first video, we saw a rise in something else: response videos. Some people had covered Anita during the Kickstarter project, but it wasn't until the release of her first video that more YouTubers took an interest. Something else emerged as well: people making videos defending Anita Sarkeesian, although that movement was relatively small in comparison to those that were criticizing Anita. I'm not going to cover a lot of those channels, but one channel that emerged sometime after Anita started releasing videos was PBS Game Show, hosted by Jamin Warren. He joined YouTube in July of 2013, but we'll get back to him shortly. As time went on, Anita released more videos, as did her critics and supporters. Something else came to light during the process: Anita Sarkeesian's history as well as conspiracy theories. Once again, I don't have a lot to add that hasn't already been said. However, one thing we learned since Gamergate, when people started digging around, was just how connected a lot of these people are, but I'm not going into Gamergate just yet. As far as the responses to Anita, one thing I've never been a fan of is people who yell or use excessive insults. I'm not against people speaking their mind, but I do feel this behavior is part of the problem. However, when legitimate criticism is leveled and it's ignored, I also feel that is part of the problem. Remember the Ludic Salon panel that I covered earlier? It's remarkable how the language in tropes versus women in video games resembles what was talked about back then.
Both Torsten and I really love games, so it's not to say that we're only negative about them, but we're very concerned.
But remember that it's both possible, and even necessary, to simultaneously enjoy media while also being critical of its more problematic or pernicious aspects.
I don't like, I just say what I don't like. I don't like the games industry.
Most recently, Double Dragon Neon in 2012 reintroduced new gamers to this regressive crap yet again.
What is a casual game? I mean, it's just fun. And for me, it's not enough.
No game mechanics are provided to call an EMT, administer first aid, or check in on the victim.
That it's hard to admit or to own up to the things that the powers that they really do have, whether it's for good or not.
It should go without saying that it's dangerously irresponsible to be creating games in which players are encouraged and even required to perform violence against women in order to save them.
For me, that was mainly about we can't retreat into the fantasy that games have no impact.
Those who most strongly believe that media is just harmless entertainment are also the ones most likely to uncritically internalize harmful media messages.
If you've got people who are young enough and subversive enough to make it really cool to attack this bloated media, then it's something that we could really use, I think.
Remember, kids, you can like a piece of media, but also be critical of it at the same time.
If you've got people who are young enough and subversive enough to make it really cool to attack this bloated media,
remember, kids,
then it's something that we could really use, I think.
The ideas and theories are all very similar.
I believe the gameplay can change real-world behavior. What games do really well is bring a lot of different parts, certainly through creating games also. Games bring a lot of different things together, bring a lot of different types of reasoning into a single space, and that ultimately will have some effects in terms of changing how you think about the world or how you put things together. They're really, really powerful really powerful agents of change, and so I think that collectively, like having discussions like this about, what does the future of games look like and thinking ahead, I think that's probably the most helpful thing that game designers can do in terms of thinking about how best to use their tools.
Jamin Warren was featured in the video during the Ludic Salon panel.
Let's play a little game.
They're really, really powerful really powerful agents of change.
Let's see some of the other stuff in this video.
It's not only an exciting possibility,
but it can be a reality that art, including games, can be overlapped but actually become reality.
I've often noticed that when I play a video game, I'm engaging with this dimension of space, this front space. And I'm kind of like, I kind of get this feeling that I'm kind of separating from my backspace and other sensory, other systems of my body. Sometimes even my hearing, although hearing is really involved. I haven't played a ton of video games, so I'm basing this on a few different experiences.
Because I think very often it's when the people sit in front of the screen and just use their mouse and their keys, and so they just forget their body. It just comes back when the back hurts, when they realize, oh God, I have to stretch myself, and then they realize, oh, I have a body.
I think one of the things that one of the things I'm good at is looking at things from a different perspective. I mean, what I consider my work to be doing is molecular biology in reverse.
There will be people that grow up with games whose entire lives are affected by those games. Game designers have a moral obligation in the sense that they're creating addictive media. They're creating essentially chemically habit-forming media.
I think that it is only a matter of time before some politician somewhere basically looks at a lot of these social games and says, these are certain types, this encourage certain types of human behavior and they need to be regulated. There's no like Hippocratic oath that game designers have to, and maybe that's what this is all about. There's in other fields and other disciplines, there are a set of standards that you sort of have to abide by, or expectations that you have that you will not use your powers for evil.
Gamification is something which is a sort of trend at the moment. Everybody, if you look at the TED Talks going on, a lot of people are talking about how to implement game rules, gameplay mechanisms into everyday interfaces like car navigation, whatever. And the basic idea behind gamification is how to motivate people to do stuff they perhaps wouldn't want to do.
And I think that we will be playing lots of games without even thinking of them necessarily as games. That these, how we think about game systems will become so embedded in our everyday existence that we won't even be able to make the distinction anymore between sort of playing a game and living our real lives.
The full video was a bit longer with a lot of the same ideas and theories. Going back to PBS Games Show, if you sort his videos oldest to newest, his first video was Will Mario, Link, and Sonic Last Forever, published in August 2013. I don't have much to say about his video outside of one thing at the end.
And if you like what you see, subscribe. I'll be here every week, forever and ever.
It sounds like Jamin Warren had long-term plans when he started his channel. Now going back to his channel, his fourth video was Do Gamers Need Anita Sarkeesian's Feminism, published in September of 2013. I'm not going to cover the entire video, but there is a heavy slant in favor of Carolyn Pettit and Anita Sarkeesian, who the video focuses on. But in the description he asks, so does that make Anita a video game Rosa Parks? Watch the episode to find out. I think the comparison is a little far-fetched. Anita also linked to this video on her Tumblr. Not only does Jamin have long-term plans, early on with PBS Game Show, he showed his support of Anita. Jamin also talks about video game feminism as well as other social justice causes within gaming. He is just one example of an ideological push into gaming. With this ideological push, the harassment narrative continued, which was enough to keep Anita in the spotlight. But some other things happened along the way. A push for certain types of independent games, as well as attacks on mainstream and traditional games. Two of the most famous games they pushed were Depression Quest and Gone Home back in 2013. I was not involved in things back then, or even aware of Anita Sarkeesian until the later part of 2014, so I'll try my best to explain this based on what I know. These games started a lot of controversy due to their favorable coverage. These non-traditional games were championed by gaming journalists and held in high regards. The connection between developers and game journalists didn't become a mainstream thing till 2014 during Gamergate, but there is also the ideological aspect. These are also the games they wanted. Non-traditional games that challenged the status quo. Games that were used to try and convince consumers that it was what they wanted, and that were used to try and convince other game developers that is what consumers wanted. Before we go any further, I also need to cover one other thing. That was the attack on mainstream and traditional games. Since I started my critique on tropes versus women in video games, I've seen a lot of controversy in video games, especially over female representations. But I was not around for the early days of Anita Sarkeesian. However, I did find one such controversy from 2013 over the sorceress in Dragon's Crown. Posted on Kotaku by Jason Schreier in April of 2013, game developers really need to stop letting teenage boys design their characters. This is the newest trailer for Dragon's Crown, the Vanillaware developed game that will be out this year for PS3 and Vita. It features the sorceress, one character from the game. As you can see, the sorceress was designed by a 14-year-old boy. Perhaps game development studios should stop hiring teenagers. At least they're cheap, I guess. This article is rather insulting to whoever designed the character. I feel this is a disrespectful way for someone to critique a piece of media, but there's more. Update. This story has gotten a little bit bigger over the past couple of days, and I've apologized for insulting Dragon's Crown artist George Kamitani. For more context, check out our follow-up right here. In the follow-up article, The Real Problem with the Controversial Sexy Video Game Sorceress, he elaborates on why he criticized the sorceress. This article never should have been published in its initial incarnation, but it was. As a result, it caused some tension between both the readers and the artist who designed the sorceress. This is just one example of a gaming journalist disrespectfully criticizing a game and causing a controversy over it. I've also seen several hate campaigns leveled against game developers over female representations in games over the last year, but the first time I just sat back and watched one was over the Pillars of Eternity joke. I'd never been a fan of the behavior exhibited by certain people on both sides of the discussion, but as I watched during that particular incident, I was just shaking my head at the feminist hate campaign. I've also seen misrepresentations and unfair criticisms of other games, the biggest target being Grand Theft Auto 5.
I didn't go into writing that GTA 5 review with any illusions that it was just going to go down smoothly. Like I was like, okay, you know, I'm devoting like one paragraph and a really long review to this, and that is going to be the only thing that anyone reacts to.
It's amazing. You gave it a 9.
I know, right?
But I think it's a bigger issue to talk about the industry as a whole and how it perpetuates these ideas of sexism and misogyny as opposed to just Grand Theft Auto, for example.
Violent depictions of women being beaten, raped, and run over by cars. It's not the movies, it's video games.
As a player, you can solicit a prostitute, kill her, and if that's not enough, you have the option to run her over. We've reached out for comment multiple times to Rockstar Games, Ubisoft, the companies behind these games, to ask about the way women are portrayed. But thus far, we've received no reply.
I'll also note this happened sometime after Anita Sarkeesian released her first video. It's probably not a coincidence that with the arrival of Anita Sarkeesian, the attitudes of gaming journalists toward female representations in games shifted. They became less tolerant. In August of 2014, Aaron Joni published the Zoe post, which eventually led into the Gamergate controversy. The two main narratives that emerged were ethics in gaming journalism and harassment of women. I don't know how much more I could add that hasn't already been said, so rather than try to explain it, I'll just do a little rambling here. Both sides already existed before the hashtag, and the tensions further divided everyone. I remember there was a lot of anger and frustration on both sides, especially in the first several months. More YouTube channels started popping up in the early days, including my first channel. Other YouTube channels that already existed started focusing more on Gamergate and Anita Sarkeesian. Gaming journalists began their assault on white male gamers. We were declared over. We were cast aside in favor of what they said was a new era. And this is where I'll leave it off. Hopefully, someone got some perspective out of this.